Thank you for the invitation. I am not an artist, not academic. My background was always in representing artists and being excited about this field and really trying to reach and excite other people and collectors to get involved in digital art. It started in the 80s for me, that I met an artist at the time who was teaching at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and I saw my first computer prints made on an Amiga Commodore in color, printed out on the beach in Florida, and I thought, I was working as a gallerist and art consultant at the time, but that's really strange. Why is it not happening at all anywhere? Nobody, and nothing on the art market. Digital art didn't exist, really. So I researched, got into it further, and so there are some meeting places like Ars Electronica and A.I.C.C.A in USA where you meet all the artists and pioneers. So I really got involved, and as you already mentioned, for a very long time, there was no market. There were only very few people who were interested in buying this kind of work. Institutions were basically not covering it. But I was excited. And lucky enough, I survived it. I'm still here. And in the last years, a lot has happened. So many people have really realized how important this medium is in our society. We discussed it already in the talks before with other people. I mean, AI is influencing our society to a drastic, major influence. And many people are not aware of it. And I think with the arts, we can draw attention to it and make people a little bit more understand what is going on and get them into it. So coming back to the main topic of our conference here, let me see. Oh, that's not where I wanted to be. But, okay, here we go. So we have digged into this topic now from a very complex end, the contemporary times, and especially Greta Lowe, she explained that very well, the different aspects when you work with computers, when you work with artificial intelligence, when you work with robots, and all this technology, how many factors are involved. A little perspective where it all started, because it gives a little bit of an idea and maybe a more conceptual understanding of what is going on right now. What you see here is 1967. Prix Ars Electronica, one of the first guys who started programming with algorithms, and the excitement was at the time to write an algorithm which of course had variations, which allowed to go through different kind of steps and find and discover new compositions. I just saw you, just an example. These were the simple beginnings. At that time, of course, the artists had to write everything. I mean, it was at that time punch cards, you had to write a program, it was transferred to punch cards, it was moved into, computed overnight or days or whatever, and in the end result, it was drawn with a pen plotter, like you're still working, but high technology pen plotter. So, and the variations were not predictable to that degree. So, of course, he was excited, and he already worked in series, and that was the beginning. The computer allowed to define an aesthetic concept, put it in an algorithm, and discover new aesthetics. And that's what we are still doing today to some degree, but with a large, complex system. I'll give you another example and another perspective on it, and then I'm already. So, another famous artist in this field is Vera Molnar. She started a bit late. Oh, no, that's not right. The picture dropped off, yeah. Okay. So this is a small series from Vera Molnar, an artist started in '68, and she worked in series, of course, as well, based on algorithms. And you see the actual development of the algorithm. And she explained to me later that she was totally excited about the compositions she discovered. So she created this algorithm. Different pictures or plotter drawings at the time were realized and drawn, and then she realized or saw aesthetic compositions she didn't expect. And that encouraged her to work in specific fields. So she used the algorithm basically to develop her art, a kind of a tree. You start with something and you find something interesting, you go in another branch, or you go another branch, and so on. And still, of course, she was only working with algorithms at the time, which she wrote herself. And what we will talk about it now, and Mario is a perfect example, because we have now a very complex system up to the situation we probably might talk about, Botto and so on, up to a system that even is not anymore controlled by one single artist. It's controlled by a community. And I'm really interested by these aspects of how that affects the art, or to what degree is this art? Does art need an individual vision behind it, or not anymore? To what degree is AI really the representation of a specific person, or is it not a result of many, many, many programmers being involved in this whole topic and creating something together in correlation to the artist? And that's what I'm hoping to hear more about it in our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Peter Beyls now will give us also some insights. He's an interdisciplinary artist, and he has educational background in engineering and music. He has a PhD in computer science from the UK in Plymouth. He also has a strong academic background. He was a professor in Brussels, also the School of Art in Ghent. He has a studio and activities still in Ghent, and he probably will tell us more. And I will stop there and let Peter.
Okay, thank you. So I have just prepared a few slides, 5-6 slides, because the focus will be on the discussion. So as Frederic said, my background is in engineering, in computer science and music, but I've always done visual art as well, and developing generative systems for over 50 years now. And my short presentation will be about my most recent work that started just before the pandemic. And it is a research project entitled Material Matters. So it's about figuring out how humans and machines and objects and materials can coexist in a shared physical environment, and having the creation of aesthetic meaning from what artists have always been doing, creating art from creating materials with other materials. And so one of my research questions is to figure out how we can use materials and machines without programming them explicitly, but creating meaning from their structure, their architecture, their behavioral scope, etc. And I've been doing this, most of us, for many years with purely imagined, invented algorithms that we implement and then explore their behavioral scope and try to figure out the complexity that we can generate. And now robotics actually adds a cognitive dimension where the body can be mapped and be integrated as a motor, as an engine to participate in this process of creation, right? So it is also like actually the robotic work started from my musical work, because I developed machine learning systems where a single human performer, a musician, and a single machine musician coexist and start from scratch, improvise, learn from one another. And the basic idea is that the machine wants to express its own personal character, while at the same time it aims to integrate itself in a larger social whole. So it has to solve this psychological conflict of integration versus expression. So sometimes I refer to this as the psychology of machines, because of course the psychology of machines is based on the psychology of humans. But anyway, so for figuring out, do you see this clearly? Yeah. Just briefly, very briefly, I think it's important to understand where we are dealing with machines. On the one hand side, we have instrumental control, and on the other hand, we have autonomy. So autonomy is very different from automatic. And my work is centered on the paradox of programming a computer without programming it. So basically, I'm interested in lifelike systems that can surprise me. They are unpredictable, but still they are very coherent because they live in the same universe as myself. And I'm not so much interested in structure, but way more interested in behavioral participation and how this can emerge from sharing many different materials, objects, ideas, etc. This is one project. It's the algorithmic flag swinger. It's a very old project, and it's based on a finite state machine. So it's a probabilistic model of how the 6 degrees of freedom of this particular industrial robot can move within a particular space defined in the algorithm. And that's the simulation on a UR10 robot. And so basically speaking, when we talk about human-machine interaction, we in a shared physical environment, we understand that humans are influenced by culture, totally determined by the nature of where they live, the books they have read, the paintings they have seen, etc., etc. But the machine doesn't have any culture at all. So also important to know that people make paintings just by the thrill of it. They get excited by getting in the flow, and so there is intrinsic motivation. A machine doesn't have this. A machine might get motivated because motivation is very important in my thinking, because what I try to do is create motivated machines, and so they can develop a relationship with me. And so this is the global thing. I won't spend too much time about this, but this is how I can have a family of different types of nonlinear relationships that I map onto what's happening in the system. And as I said, integration versus expression. And this is a sketch from a human robot system that I'm developing, where the distance, I'm trying to develop a notion of distance between man and machine. And distance can be like physical distance between two people, how they interact, develop relationships. And with a robot and a human, can be like, I'm making some gesture and the robot makes another gesture at a particular physical distance within a normalized possible scope of distances. And if I choose some color, the software chooses a different color, so I have a distance in color space. And how all this can map to having the development of a human-machine relationship without programming explicitly. The relationship should evolve over time by doing something. So you do first and think after that, after doing something. And the whole process starts from scratch, from a single, it starts from scratch, and then there's a single random action that bootstraps the system, and from then on we have a reference that we can continue, etc. And so I've done some experiments, a lot of experiments with computer vision where I'm trying to develop this, it's the application COCO, it's a color communication. So there's a robot and a human try to interact just by exchanging color as a very basic beginning to figure out and try to then do some experiments and try to track the history and then try to figure out what's happening in this history. All this is very speculative computing, as I call it. So I'm trying and developing software to just to figure out also to quite a large degree to figure out where I'm heading, because at some point I'm just poking in the dark. And it's an important concept is that objectives are actually developed in the process of developing objectives by handling the materials. Just like anyone would make a painting, by the smell of oil paint, you get inspired and you do and continue from there on and so on and so forth. Now, I also do this kind of large-scale CNC machine. It's a really big one. You don't have any sound? It should be. No. Okay, you get the idea. This is the kind of really big drawings that result from there. So you were 10 robot making a watercolor. This is the kind of work that results from there. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And now Mario Klingemann.
How do I find the presentation?
It should be up.
Oh, sorry. I'm not a Mac person.
Yeah, me neither. We had it on before.
Should be in here.
It's at the bottom there.
yeah.
No. Okay, and just a few words on Mario, for those who don't know Mario yet. So he's well known in the last decade, let's say, as very recognized for his art intersecting with progress in AI, also called AI art movement. I'm sure he will tell us a little more about it. And also, maybe something we can discuss later, his work has been recognized by a number of recent prizes, such as Ars Electronica Prize, mentioned,
Got it.
British Library Lab Creative Award, the Lumen Prize Gold, which is one of the important prizes in that space. And maybe we can talk about that later. His work is also exhibited in areas like centers like Centre Pompidou in Paris, EACVA, Karlsruhe, the Barbican in London, the Ermitage, St. Petersburg, MoMA in New York.
All right, thank you. So actually, it says down there how to not paint by numbers, because when Liat asked me a few weeks ago if I want to join this, I was saying like, I'm not sure if I kind of like have anything to show, because I mean, I can talk about how I failed, how in my eyes I failed so far making my robot paint, because I mean, in a way I do own my own robot, also Euro 10 since 4 years, but so far I feel I have not that much to show for. So let's see, does this work actually? Yeah. So show this in the background. So actually I realized that my first ever output device when I learned computing was actually a plotter. So that was in the early 80s, and it was a programmable pocket calculator, and it had a small plotter. So I was always fascinated by making machines draw. And so over time I also tried to build my own, but having my own robot was always kind of a dream, because I mean, it's actually not so much the ability to draw something, but rather watching it kind of move. So I really like the idea of making, I don't know, 30 kilos move at really fast pace, because in some sense, because the other thing is, I'm not a painter. I never painted, I don't know how to, I have a terrible handwriting, so in theory, I would like to paint, but I can't do it. So it's almost like my hope was to get a robot almost as a prosthesis that allows me to paint like I imagine I could paint. At the same time, I love dancing. I mean, I'm not a professional dancer, but I really like moving to music, and I have it on good authority that I'm actually quite good at it. So there is a certain thing about like turning some latent space, like translating music into motion, or translating kind of thoughts into motion. And so my idea when getting the robot was, I want to kind of combine the two and get beautiful motion and at the same time do expressive strokes. Like a robot is different to a plotter. So because like the thing that I showed you before, why do I need a robot to do 2D drawing? So the whole point is the robot has more axes, so like you want to kind of do tilting and do kind of interesting stuff. And so I started with simple experiments, and looking good, so I can do tilting, and yeah, but then things like these happen. Like you think everything's all right, but then this thing does something else. And so I started developing kind of certain trust issues with this machine, because it is kind of, like it's dangerous, right? So this thing can really move at a really kind of fast pace, so you have this thing, it's like a wild animal, like that seems to be calm, but it also is doing these like unpredictable things, especially if you program it yourself. And that's the other thing, I like programming my robots myself, but it's a complex machine, so you also use these kind of like system tools that make things easier. My problem with these is they do not have the expressiveness that I want in this thing. So, okay, so this is just kind of like, again, like certain trust tests, like you saw that it actually goes into, like after I move it, it goes straight, which, so yeah, this works fine, but actually, do you see that? So this is exactly the kind of stuff, and there's no sound, but it actually hurts. So, and this is the stuff where you start to think, yeah, I can totally trust this thing, and then suddenly you don't realize, oh, it does something that I didn't expect. So, and there are worse things like, this stuff. Yeah, this is my collection of brushes I killed, because when you program these things yourself, there's a weird thing, like it does everything in meters, and and when you really say like, okay, move 1 millimeter down, you have to do like 0.0001, and well, hastily programming something, you might miss out a 0, and then instead of going 1 millimeter down to touch the canvas, it tries to actually go 1 centimeter down through the canvas, and that's kind of the power it has, so it kills brushes. And that's why I move at very slow pace, kind of trying to get this. I want fast motion. I don't want to watch a robot move in slow motion. I want things that are like dances, and that's kind of where my problem lies. So I do all these tests where I build my own devices. Actually, oh yeah, there you see already kind of like something, dealing with 2 colors. I mean, I saw all these issues that you have, and I have the same, like, how do you deal with actually kind of putting a brush into and picking up color? How do you change color? So I built little contraptions, like, allows me to change brushes. But there you also have it that you have singularities in a robot where, again, everything works fine, and then you say, move to this position, and say, oh yeah, cool, I do this. And then it goes kind of through the wall, trying to get into this new configuration. And that's where I really have these issues where I move at baby pace. So what do we have here? Oh yeah, again, like, yeah, my painting setup. So you see it already, because it's painting all this time, the brush starts changing its shape. So you cannot be sure that the tip that was nice at a certain point will actually end up, after doing whatever, 20 centimeters of painting, that it ends up at the space where you want it. So that's the thing. I want to be able to control it in order to then let go of control. But first I have to figure out how to get most control. And yeah, and I'm not happy with these results. So that's, it's, so, and what have we got last? Is this, oh, is it doing the same thing? Oh, how do I get to the next? One more time. Ah, what do we have here? Oh. Yeah, so I think that's kind of, again, something, oh yeah, you see all these kind of little actions you have to do, right? Like, oh, you have too much kind of ink, so you have to drip it off, all these little decisions. So this is kind of like squigglies I can do. So, but again, it's not what I hope for. It's again like almost like 2D plotting, but this is already trying to play with speed and with exactly like, how do I set something down and pick something up and be in a bit fast enough or so. What else is happening here? So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. What I like is kind of like trying to get some dynamics in there. So like that the brush keeps it up. But again, I have no idea about painting, so it's more like going with my gut feelings. And but yeah, I don't want to do squiggles. So this is kind of where I am, like trying to get the system better to do actually something interesting. And so yeah, oh come on, how does this work? Oh, I thought there was one more. Ah, so yeah, and this is currently where I ended up. Eventually they're realizing the one thing the bot is really good is precision. And so this is not the best example, but so I have all these old brushes and I realized like I mount this old brush onto the robot and just ram it into the canvas, rotate it a bit, and then I repeat the same process. And the fascinating thing that happens that a human can't do is that it is like copy-paste. Oh, you can't really see it, but so in a way, that precision is amazing because like it rams the brush into it. So you think like the bristles get all kind of jumbled up, but then you repeat the process and you get almost like a copy-paste effect where a human could never affect the same thing. So that's kind of where these were the first works that I actually put in a show, and I tried the other thing then kind of at some other point. So I didn't talk about AI at all. Of course, there's AI involved in some sense by doing squiggles, but maybe we come to that later. Should I put it to something else? Or?
Oh, no, I think it's fine. It's interesting. Thank you. So maybe, Mario, we could continue with what you presented, and you mentioned AI. So, of course, you're very well known for working in using current AI or recent AI technologies. So what's this interest in actually having a robot and even exploring? Why are you spending so much time? You mentioned dance, so maybe there's...
Oh yeah, dance. So I don't know. I like physical things. Oh, sorry.
I think that's okay. Well, so that's the thing. On one hand, I like working digitally, but in the end, haptic things are moving stuff. So I always love to go to the museums where you press a button and some diorama starts moving. So it's simply, I find it extremely aesthetic, and so I want to see it. And it's also kind of this feeling of power that you are able to make something move according to your will, and at the same time, I don't want to create a puppet. I want, like Peter, I want to create a surprise. And so my hope is, like, of course, that once I figured out to safely move it, then it does its own motions that I hopefully find aesthetically pleasing, surprising, somehow synesthetic. So that's why I'm going there. Just also because it's a good challenge. So I always, maybe I feel that at some point I have exhausted making images. That's why I have Botto now. So I have an AI that can do the pure image making for me. So it's just about trying something new, learning something, and seeing. And of course, AI has to be part of it because it allows to create these complex systems which have the potential to be surprising, even though in reality, even that surprise wears off. But at the same, unlike a pure algorithm, AI is really a black box where, depending on what it was trained on, you never know what you still might get, right? It's a huge LLM is like a universe or a huge image model, which you never will fully be able to explore. And I like that as explorer aspect.
But when I got you right on your work with the robot, you're actually programming it yourself. So you have under control to some degree which direction you're going, opposed to AI, which is an enormous broad field. So what would you like to accomplish aesthetically or as an artist with that?
I will know it when I'm there, but that's the problem. That right now, as I said, I'm a bit afraid of that machine. Also, the problem being an independent artist who had the luck to have his own $35,000 robot. When I break it, there is no university that says, okay, let's get a new one. So this is the one I have. And these things can, like, if it runs into the wall, then I probably have to put it, like, send it back. And so it makes, and combining this potential, like it doing weird motions, like with an AI that you also kind of, you can never fully predict what it, like it might, it might be doing everything perfectly fine for a whole day, and the next day you turn it on and there is some weird thing and suddenly and this is really frightening. It's like somebody with a baseball bat standing next to you, and then so you can, that's why I'm training so carefully. And I haven't gotten to the point where I get the trust in my own code that I write that I might not have made a mistake that will destroy the robot. So it's not a good thing. But yeah, ultimately, once I have the trust, then I hook the AI in and then we'll see what happens. But I always work it, like, I first have to figure out, understand every part, and then I know where I let it go, where I give it the freedom. But that's my problem, that right now I don't have the trust in it, and I feel I do not have the full understanding of all the implications to give it the freedom to do kind of, that amount of freedom.
What about you, Peter?
Your question was about...
Have you gotten to a point that you aesthetically, as an artist, can accomplish with this tool what you would like to accomplish?
Not really.
Typical question of a generation.
I think not in a million years. But as Mario said, the notion of exploration is very important, because basically when you write software, at least I can only speak for myself, I think of software as a really a fluid medium where you can speculate, really. It's like a speculative medium where you can formalize some sort of abstract idea, which is probably incomplete, it might be totally wrong, but once you get it implemented, and once you implement this idea, the system talks back to the programmer. So for that reason, I think of software or computing as a medium of aesthetic introspection, as I call it. So you can play in a gradual fashion with gradual specification of objectives, really. So it's like a digital playground where and now in particular with robotics, this robotics adds a material dimension to this process, which is of course fascinating, because we have the only reference, because when we make art, I also think of art as a social phenomenon, because when we create art, it is linked to the concept of culture in a very broad setting. So the only field of reference we have is the whole of art history. So for that reason, we are kind of afloat in the, at least as I can see it, in a fascinating medium where we're trying to figure out where we are, where to head, and how to develop, etc. You see, I think of art as a very dynamic, on the move kind of thing.
Question to Peter and Mario. How important is it for you you mentioned control, Mario, and you just talked about programming. How important is it that you are doing the coding, or do you collaborate with other programmers, artists?
I write all the code myself, because I think it would be like asking someone, I want to make a drawing, you draw for me. I mean, it doesn't make sense, I think. I also do a lot of drawing by hand, because I think a pencil is way more interactive as a medium than a computer. You see? That's one of the questions that I ask my students. So what do you think? What is more interactive? What I might ask you. What is more interactive, a pencil or a computer? What do you think? A pencil, you think? A pencil, yeah. What? Computing, maybe?
I think both.
Both, okay.
I would say it has.
Well, who thinks a pencil is more interactive than a computer? Raise your hand.
I mean, what is interactive, right?
Yeah, what is interactive? Well, I think a pencil is more interactive because it relates to the topology of your body. It is an instrument for thinking in the first place, that it doesn't need electricity or complex whatever. And most people, when they're thinking hard, they might put the pencil in their mouth. So they're trying to suck the idea from the pencil, which is very significant. No, it's not, it's something very significant because it defines the cognitive process that develops in the, we're talking about embodiment all the time. This is an example of, a fundamental example of an embodied medium where your thinking integrates with who you are as a situated person participating in an environment. But what was your question?
Whether you code.
Whether I code, yes, I write all the software myself.
So I have the same question for mine.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because it changed over the past 2 years or 1 year. But yeah, I mean, of course, I write all the code myself, and it's important to me because I also think that is at the core of what I do. And since since last year, AI models became so good that all the mundane stuff, the boring stuff, I let the AI do now. Because for me, programming is not writing code, right? It is structure. I like turning ideas into structure, and so in that sense, I think I've done my share of trying to optimize code on the code level in certain things, but now it's really more about putting the components together, and whatever boring parts I let the machine do. Or, I don't know, all my tools, I build my own tools, of course, and they always suffered from having very cryptic interfaces because I was just too lazy to implement buttons and things, so it has keyboard shortcuts and only I can use them because I wanted to go to the interesting stuff and not building beautiful interfaces. But now I have an AI that I say, okay, I want to do this, and like build me please something with these buttons, and then I can do all the fun stuff, and it's amazing. And at the same time also it opens up new things because there's a difference between having a slider or having to enter a number, and sometimes that allows you to explore quicker, and I just never bothered to put in a slider, and so this gives me even more time to explore spaces. And about control, so yes, I like to be in control in order to kind of let go of control, right? So a bit like Peter saying, I'm curious what happens, what the machine will do, but of course it takes a lot of thinking, like how to give it that freedom so it doesn't just randomly jump off, but almost in a thoughtful way. So trying to produce surprise in a controlled way. And because of course also the matter of surprise, the problem is that it's not repeatable, right? That's the tricky part. Like once you know the rest, know the joke, you cannot laugh about the same joke again, right? So, and that's
the nasty thing about trying to find something new that it wears off so quickly. But that's also where the hope is, that if I build that machine that can understand what I'm looking for and find me more of the things I don't know about.
Another question. Looking at the art aspect of the whole game we are playing, one of the pioneers I represent for a while is Manfred Mohr, and he started in the 1970s as well, and since the middle 70s he only works with the cube form, just the cube. Everything is based on cubes, a very futuristic approach. And he produces software since 2000, so it's real-time software. You can play it in real time as well. Before it was just pictures, which were the result of it. And he produces always, along with the software, he produced pictures, prints, based on the new software he developed. And I once spoke to him about it. I said, listen, how do you decide which print is good and which is not good? Because factually, there is no difference. The algorithm produces the different kind of prints, and some of them he says, that's what is a good artwork, and this is deleted. So you were talking about that as well, right? How do you deal with that aspect? I mean, how do you deal, I mean, that is a very interesting aspect, because obviously the human approach and viewpoint, which is you, which is coming into it, is deciding in the end which is a good artwork or not. And I see it as well in the gallery. I mean, more people relate to a specific artwork, even so the basis is all of them the same. But some of them are more attractive to us than others.
I don't know, I'm kind of, I love information theory. So for me, everything is kind of about information. And in a sense, like, let's say you have an algorithm that produces a lot of outputs. There is statistics involved, and there are more probable outputs than others. And like, of course, then there's the question, like, how do you compare them? And I would say everybody has then a different, almost like feature vectors, like what are you looking at? Like what aspects are you actually taking into account in like determining this is more common or this is more aesthetic than something else? So that's a personal thing. But personally, I then like to go for the rare, unusual things. Which of course is a statistical thing. So I look at 1,000 outputs and I realize, oh, whatever, this type of stroke it's always doing it, so I find it boring. And this is kind of special. This seems to be only happening once, so I might pick it because it's so unusual. And then of course, typical aesthetic measures like whatever, rule of thirds, they might play into it. Maybe it reminds you of something else. So recognition in the sense that, oh, I don't know. And then of course this whole, I don't know, kind of, does it have multiple layers, dimensional, like is it kind of, like if I look at this piece again in a year, will I see it differently based on, that's the other thing. I'm trying to already anticipate kind of how quickly it will bore me, like if I have to see this again. But then and all this comes together in something I would say gut feeling, where I just, it's just saying, yeah, this is it. But underneath there is a complex program running saying like, and these are my personal kind of measures that I apply in the selection. But at the same time, I also think that's why I leave that to machines nowadays. But yeah, we might get to that later on.
Because the opposite is Botto, right?
Yeah, but let's see what Peter has to say, then maybe you come to what.
Well, what I usually do is play with algorithms, and so you come up with this new algorithm and you're trying to discover the behavioral scope, and so you end up having a portfolio of behaviors. But normally there is always a process of curation, because for some reason some output is, you like it better than some other output, and without really knowing why, but it's just like a feeling. But another important aspect is that when you're creating such a portfolio, you're figuring out the the degrees of freedom inside this abstract system. And when you're, for instance, having you're creating a series of drawings, and an important point is that you're trying to maximize diversity, which would, for some people, it might sound like a political attitude, and I guess it is that within this single entity, it is formalized like a virtual machine, and it needs activation. So that's where randomness comes in, because I think of that's what I do. I create this virtual machine, and then I push it somehow, try to activate it. And the engine is activated by randomness, so it pushes it, and so it can expose itself, really. That's what it does, and then you end up having a portfolio of all different drawings still belonging to the same system.
I've heard before, I think, the desire to have a machine which can surprise, and also the idea of exploring novelty somehow. So do you think, given the discussion we just had, that you need the machine to do what you just described, that is, appreciate or select or curate themselves before getting back to you? Is that a necessity, or is that something you want to keep for yourself?
It's certainly not about control, but as I said, I work according to a number of first principles. One is the maximization of diversity. Another principle is the principle of influence rather than control. I'm not controlling anything at all. I'm making some virtual machine and then try to influence it, not control it. So I'm trying to like with the robots in general, try to coexist with this robot by sharing a common physical environment, and then at equal levels of authority. That's also an important principle, where you're sharing this physical platform, because that's what artists do. They like to play with materials and so on, and there's an enormous history in this sense. So it's more like playful coexistence in sharing rather than control.
So the question is, what is surprise? So in my eyes, it is not meeting your expectations in a good way, right? Because what we do is we try constantly to predict the future, what will happen next. So we kind of have this trajectory and say, okay, or you have a system, then you build an inner model of how you expect it to behave, and then you make a prediction how it will behave next. And if it does not behave as you expect, that's a surprise, and ideally it's a positive surprise. And in that aspect, I believe that you can only use external measures you cannot really surprise yourself, because you already know what you will be doing next. So that's why artists are also using random external inputs or physics. Like, you cannot fully control whatever paint with a brush, so it has its own life, how it's kind of mixing on the canvas. And so a machine allows you to bring in these external forces in a controlled way, in some sense, as an algorithm that you either use randomness to control certain parameters that gives it the freedom to surprise you in a certain dimension, or now with AI having access to let's say a large part of what is known to us, like not everything, and that's actually a problem. So, but yes, you have this external intelligence which can inject things that are not known to you in a semi-controlled way into your piece and show you something you don't know yet. The problem is with surprise, again, and also the AI models, and we already recognize that they behave also in a predictable way, right? They write in a certain style that, like, once you work with them for a while, you recognize as, typical AI style. Same with kind of the terrible image models that produce a certain
beautiful mediocrity, and so they were able to surprise us for 2 years, and now they bore us. And that's exactly where you again have to go in and try to push it out of its normal, like Gaussian distribution. So surprise is always kind of on the outer edges, and that's where having a machine that you can control and where you can again say like, yes, this is your typical behavior, but now whatever, change this value, and hopefully it gives you something else. And maybe it's, but yeah, it's a surprise, and novelty search has diminishing returns. The longer you live, the more you've seen, the less can surprise you. That's always my problem. So, and yeah, it's more like a drug, so you have to find that next thing that you can inject into your, and so maybe that's why I'm going physical, because there's still a world that is not so familiar to me, where I still hope to get something that can excite me, or do, yeah.
You mentioned AI systems. You implied they have evolved in a way, and you mentioned boredom and the kind of an output that we see in major systems. Why do you see this happening? What's the force that pushes?
Oh, it's simply the way they are trained to be. Like that's kind of like based on the training data, right? They are kind of trained to optimize by certain criteria, and for example, like image models, the first ones were more interesting than the ones now, because they were still kind of not optimized for a certain aesthetic. So now aesthetic is a very important factor in the selection of images that were used to fine-tune them, but that also means kind of the distribution of what the possible outcomes are smaller. So maybe you have to look at different things, but for me it's already becoming kind of a typical repertoire, so you have to find ways to differently, but of course surprise can happen on multiple levels. So now maybe surprise is more in the narrative people use around using these models. So, and for example, the project, was it Anna? Like that idea that you use kind of AI to reconstruct photos that were never taken. I find that a great use that I find surprising, or something where say like, okay, yeah, that's kind of like, the aesthetic is the same, but the content and the narrative is adding something new to the use of these models. But at the same time, overall I'm the fan of putting everything into models, because that allows them to produce everything, in my idea, and not just the commonly agreed upon nice stuff, which gets very quickly boring. I mean, maybe it's...
When you say putting everything...
really, the bad stuff too. So I really agree, the ugly, the bad, everything has to go in there.
Okay, even your art.
Even my art, yes, no, but in the end, it's kind of the possibility space, and then you navigate that space, and you can avoid certain areas because you can measure them, but if they are not there, they still exist in the world, and you have to have this, it has to be there in order that it can be avoided. Or, almost like you can use, I see steering kind of in latent spaces really like you send out these probes that travel multidimensionally, and you can use certain forces to, like gravity, to get attracted or driven away by concepts or aesthetics, and the power to not go towards a trajectory like a target, but rather go away. Like there's only, like if you have a target, there's only one way direction to get towards it. But if you have something you want to avoid, there are millions of directions you can get away from where you never know where you might end up. So that's kind of, again, like trying to find novelty, surprise, kind of having forces that go away from something you already know is for me and that's why everything has to go in there. So I can say, oh no, I don't want this aesthetic, or this is like, and then you combine these forces and hope that it will end up in a good space. And then again, like aesthetically, so maybe if there's only pretty stuff, so maybe there is a part of something horrible which is a good composition. I mean, I don't know, like, let's say it's a terrible act, but whatever, it was theoretically well composed, so that you take away the content, but the composition, and it is being used on something else. And I don't even know where that composition came from, but the fusion of the two is producing something that might turn out to be fantastic. And so I don't believe that just because you put something bad into the model, it makes the output bad. So, because knowledge-wise, we know about bad things, but we don't do bad things, right? So we are capable of avoiding them. So yeah, I know some people hate that, but I believe that in order to avoid kind of bad things, you have to know about them. You cannot be ignorant, and that's why I project that onto models. And then comes the bias thing, but I believe if you know about the bias, you can avoid the bias. So it's not that the model is tainted. It is just the way you use the model in the default way that taints it. So yeah, so if you don't have the means to control how it's using that space, then you might end up with bad cliches or terrible biases. But it's still, in my opinion, it still has to be in there in order to be able to avoid it.
Maybe related. So we're at a stage where our new generation people may only explore novelty in art by using these systems, computing systems. Maybe not write ever, not draw ever. Do you think that's going to be an issue? Because probably all of us, because of our great age, we had to explore the pen at least to some extent, etc. But we're reaching a stage in society where this is not needed anymore, perhaps. Does that impact the future of aesthetics, for example?
From our point of view, yes, but not from the point of the future generation, because they don't know any better, and for them, it's the best thing they can do. So yes, from our perspective, there is something lost, but again, like, everybody who's grown up with these things, with these technologies, of course, they also get much better than us in, like you see kids like using mobile phones or playing games, I mean, at amazing speed. So this generation will be really good at exploring latent spaces, but yes, they will miss all the other things. I mean, we can hope that this knowledge is preserved. I also believe that certain cultural techniques that might be replaced will still be preserved and will find more appreciation, because very few people will still know how to, yeah. I don't think painting ever goes out of fashion because it's just a human thing, but yeah, like maybe making a living from certain creative techniques. Like nobody wants to pay for the hand-painted poster anymore, except for maybe a few who appreciate that, but most people say, oh, that AI thing is good enough as a billboard or so. So yes, I believe that a lot will be lost, and at the same time, fortunately, we have the means to at least preserve the knowledge, and hopefully there is some kind of rediscovery. Again, because people will get bored by what everybody can do, so just like now people are doing analog photography again, because like it's much more interesting than doing digital ones. So, but yeah, nobody will notice that's what's missing. What are we not noticing now that we lost? Certain cultural things that maybe 100 years people were doing and was actually great, but we are not missing it. I don't know.
I can see what you're saying, but I still believe in this kind of concept of breaking the rules. And I think if we are very much used to working with AI, and of course, like in the advertisement industry, AI is so much cheaper and more effective in producing a good result for an advertisement and so on and so on. But on the other hand, maybe it's going the way you're describing.
I mean, I'm not hoping it, but it's just the way like civilization works. Like if it's comfortable, if it's easy, it will always, like something that's fast and cheap and will always replace something that takes more effort and takes energy.
Okay, but let's talk about art.
Yeah.
Let's talk about art and breaking the rules and doing something unexpected and producing something which maybe relates to the people who are looking at it in a different way. I have seen a lot of AI pieces in the recent years which were some kind of animations. And there were wonderful floating colors and wonderful situations and so on. And there's a company, you know them probably as well, who have introduced dancing into it.
Oh, you mean those?
No, I mean MoMA.
Oh, Memo. Oh, I thought you meant app operator, actually.
That is a very different approach. No, I'm talking about MoMA and his girlfriend. And so they use AI as well. I mean, in a good way. He's a really good artist, but as well added dancing to it. So dancing is floating into it, and it relates in a different way to us human beings, I feel. And so I think maybe maybe people will start, after having seen for a very long time AI stuff, they will start drawing again with a pencil.
No doubt. Yeah. A few.
Yeah, I think that with most of the systems that are available to anyone online, where you can make, you can consider yourself an artist by using a stable diffusion or whatever, and the results are all very similar. So I think it's more like the art of the average, I would call it. And it's like if you can bring, like what Wolf is saying, if you're breaking the rules, we're trying to figure out new ways to create a statement from twisting the system in another way, as to make it original and creative, trying to make creative statements. And this brings us to the discussion of creativity. We haven't talked about that much yet, but I think creativity issues from creating new relationships where there were no relationships before. And so I think that, but not in a purely visual fashion, I would say. And also, I think, as I said before, I consider art as a social phenomenon. So you don't create art in isolation. If you create art like with a purpose I also think art has little to do with personal expression. So it is more like being aware, being conscious about who you are, where you are, what you do, what is in particular with the notion of responsibility as an artist, in particular being faced with advanced technology. I think one has an increased sense, there is somehow an increased sense of responsibility somehow, at least as I feel it as an artist. I don't know how to express this clearly, but I can feel it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to become the marketing department for OpenAI or something like come to the bright new world, right? So you are more like the canary in the coal mine, or doing kind of predictive work that says like, okay, I believe this is where we're going to, and put up warning signs or offer interesting alternatives, or like, yeah, like almost like trying to steer the stream build a little trench, so it might actually create something where you can help that they get the future that you hope it will develop in. Whereas we see that in reality that future will be exactly that avalanche of mediocrity and kind of bombarding our senses, like optimizing AI to get our attention for stuff we should buy, or something. I mean, that's or whatever political message you have to spread, that it gets optimized by a machine for reception by a certain audience because it can measure that much better. And yeah, that's what we don't want. So we try to build up these little kind of things like saying, oh, here, this is what you could do as well.
This reminds me of what in the, like maybe in the 70s when personal computers became available, and some other people were still using mainframes. And so you had the industry and academic working with PDP-15s and PDP-10s and a large infrastructure, and you had a few nerds working with Amigas and Atari computers, and so you had high-tech and low-tech, and all the work being done with low-tech was way more interesting than the flying logos and all the industry computer graphics work.
Yes. So yeah, it keeps happening again. Maybe it's time to open the floor to questions. We have already a question over there. I'm terrified.
I would start with a speculative question. So you were talking a lot about coding, variations, and techniques of visualization. But as far as I understood, AI is much about going from text to image, or from text to sound, or from text and image to animation, and so on. So my speculative question would be, what are the perspectives for robots painting on the basis of a poem, or painting robots dancing to music, and so on?
Right. I mean, for me, AI was always kind of a transformer, like you do a transformation, and initially there was just the transformer set of numbers into an image or into a text. But as you say, now we got all these other ways of translating some form of data, let's say text into an image or text into music, and so I like the idea of AI being able to be that universal translator, and so robot motion or dance or these things in a way are also just a sort of data, right? If you find the right protocol, then you can translate that either, I mean, there might be crude ways of just text or translate motion into numbers, but what I like about these latent spaces, especially of the new models, is that they do capture things from very deep levels, like almost like the unconscious, right? It doesn't just say, oh, there's a hand moving from A to B, but it says like, oh, humans think this means whatever, a gesture, or this is... So it has all these other connotations, which some of them might not even have, we have words for it, but given enough data, the AI is actually able to capture a lot of these aspects, and that means translating a poem into a robot motion is right now already feasible if you find the right way of encoding whatever data. Then, I mean, and that is the art in seeing like what's the right language to use or the right format, and then you are also in control in some sense of the translation process. But in some sense, yeah, it's always, you have some information going in and some other information going out, and then that's what art making is for me. So at the information theoretical level. So, and our repertoire of what the input and the output can be has immensely grown over the past 10 years. So, and that gives me hope, and especially because it's become much easier to use. So more people can use it and ask the different questions than just somebody who wants to make a robot just move at some certain pace, right? So exactly, like I'm not a poet, so I wouldn't have the right words to say, oh yeah, this robot moves poetically. But
I have a question regarding the gap between the digital representation and the embodied creation, in that sense, the real kind of form of a painting. And I want to ask it into the two kind of sides of the part that we have here, like the artist who created, as well from your side as a gallerist, and to see as well the reaction of audience. And as well like kind of the path that you go. So we have here people who started more like the early computer art that was mainly went into materiality through mechanical operation, and then with the booming of the digital art, we moved to the simulated, and now there is kind of this reaching out back into the real world, into painting. So I would like to kind of hear how, well, from your side, if you see any different reaction of audience to material work versus digital and how that is measured. And then I have a question actually to you, Mario. We thought that you kind of said you don't know how to paint, you never painted. So why are you trying to paint with robot and not really say, like, for example, dancing? And to your digital work, then why you wanted to simulate a painting and not to simulate more nature representation, for example, a different kind of visual representation that appears. And I want to have this kind of same question to you, Peter, someone who I think you played quite a lot with going back and forth between the mechanical and the digital, and every time anchoring in different elements. And I'm kind of interested what always drew you back into the pencil. Like why you think this embodied knowledge or intelligence in the pencil is so important that it will never be lost. So this is kind of the same question in different takes on all three of you.
Yeah.
You were first.
So I got you right, you mean about the different perception of having digital material or looking at digital art, and then now this new aspect of presenting basically digital concepts on more traditional basis like painting, right? This is not that new. I mean, there was this movement of post-internet art. Some of you might know, it started already after 2000, and the idea was that artists which were working with traditional media were picking up kind of aesthetics or concepts from the digital world and transferred it to traditional media, like a painting, or they produced installations or whatever. And I think, of course, now producing paintings which are based on algorithms or AI or whatever is, of course, very much relating for many, many people who are looking at art to what they already know. So they feel that's much more familiar, they can compare it to what they have seen before. And I think, like your work, what you just demonstrated, which I saw as well in London, your watercolors, yeah, you could say, if you don't know how they were made, it could be related to an analog approach, right? So people can easily relate to it, and it opens up a totally new field which was not accessible for the artists which are working only on screen-based art, for example, or present work on the software, on a screen.
So yeah, why am I trying to create paintings is because I really like physical work, because a screen is always flat and has a certain, I mean, it's totally different, right? It's active light, and then I love textures. I like that the painting has infinite resolution, so, and it's simply an aesthetic feeling. I mean, I only have paintings at home. I don't have screens. So there is definitely, no, sorry, that's terrible, right? I'm a peddler in digital works, but I'm not eating my own dog food. No, but
Now that I know.
No, also because, of course, you don't have to turn a painting on and off, right? So it's two different things. So I like to create work that is, I mean, ideally, if I create purely digital work, it's something that videos, it's because it's practical, but, and so yeah, I want to get that aesthetic haptic feeling, and at the same time, because I can't paint, it is a beautiful mystery to me, kind of how people are doing it, and that has always driven me. Like, I wanted to know how things work, and it seems to be simply possible that I can try to, if I look at every component that is involved in how to make a painting, like all the elements, and I try to understand every single one of them, it's almost like, then I should eventually be able to create a painting. So it's hybris or naivety, but yeah, I just like, I like a good challenge, and so that is for me one that I haven't, it's an urge.
Okay, so the basic question is this on? Yeah, you hear me? So the basic question is, why do we go back from from this algorithmic world, living inside the computer, and to go back to materialization, right? So because people are probably interested in affective, I would say perception, but it is more like experience. I think art, the basic thing of art is experience. It's not contemplation, like we would think in terms of algorithms. We conceive algorithms in some sort of, by thinking. But it is also a misunderstanding that algorithms are developed on a computer, because most of the ideas that I have originate totally outside digital thinking. They happen when when you go for a walk in a forest, or when you're exposed to a situation that is as open as possible, where you're not conditioned by anything, and certainly not by complex media like computers, because this is again kind of a contradiction in terms, because at the same time the computer is considered a tool of liberation, while in the first place it's a tool of total conditioning. It's impossible to start from scratch with a computer, because the operating itself is forcing you in a particular direction. So if the idea originates outside of the medium, and then still one implements aspects of this, one creates some sort of computational paradigm, and there are many, that is supposed to fit this idea, and then so from material to computing, back to material, when you're creating a painting or a drawing. And so maybe there is a fundamental link, a psychological link between where it comes from and where it ends. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to add a little thing which is totally missed out here, because we are one of this older generation all sitting here. I know many people who are mostly below 40 and who have a large collection of blockchain-based art, and it's purely digital. They wouldn't even think of. I know they bought pieces which are based on plotter drawings, which are then on the blockchain as a digital file, and they don't pick up the plotter drawing. They just get the digital file. They buy what is now called NFTs, but anyway. So this is a viewpoint, this is a very specific viewpoint we were discussing. That is a whole different world and exists. And it's a broad community, especially on younger people. We talked about that before, what we are used to, how we grow up, and so on and so on. So this is a very specific aspect.
But this is economical system. It has less to do with the art creation. It has more to do with the art market. And I think those are...
No, you're biased in your views. No, seriously. I mean, oh, sorry.
It is a way of marketing, right? And it is a specific way of selling this kind of work. That is totally true. And I'm one of the biggest critic, you know that, and some people who know me longer, who was always very critical about this movement and on many aspects of it. But on the other hand, it really created a community, and it really addresses it or represents a different view about dealing with art. A pure digital file. I mean, when I started selling software 20 years ago, yeah, and people were getting at that time a CD or something like that, or later on a USB stick or whatever, and the collectors looked at it and said, what happens if I delete it? They bought the software and couldn't handle the idea of buying something purely software. That has totally changed. That has definitely changed.
And related to that, for you with your gallery and the notion of preservation of art through sort of creating history, does that open new challenges? That there's this movement towards digital
Absolutely. I haven't gotten involved in this field at all. Just as a side aspect, some of my artists have done this kind of NFTs or this purely digital files, and I'm gonna get involved because I realized it's a community which is separate. I've done a show in London which was mostly addressing these kind of people, and they admire what I'm doing, this old guy, you know, and so on. But on the other hand, they wouldn't even think about buying a physical piece. So it's definitely a new development. But we don't need to address it today because that's a different field, and it's one aspect of the digital art scene.
I think I want to stick for one with this. Because NFTs, I mean, I work a bit on digital fashion. So
can you get a bit closer than I can?
I work on digital fashion a bit, and if you buy a piece of digital fashion, you will wear it in a purely digital environment, meaning either you dress your avatar or you dress yourself in, say, Instagram videos or so. How does it work for art pieces? Will they be displayed somehow in a physical environment, or will they be used in your, say, metaverse environment? How is this working?
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, there was this big trend as well, starting with COVID, that suddenly every gallery had to represent the space in a 3D space on the web, right? So they were studying this, they were rebuilding, it's funny, I mean, rebuilding the physical space so you can walk in there and walk around and click at the picture and see it, or click at the software and see it. So yeah, it's represented on the web only or on your screens or whatever.
I mean the buyer.
Sorry?
The buyer, the one who buys the NFT. Do they exhibit what they bought, the visual thing, in their private spaces, in their physical spaces, or will they have somewhere in an online community showing, somehow you show an artwork? If you have an artwork, either, okay, people also put it in the cellar, but normally you would somewhere around.
Some put it on their screen at home, and show it there. Others, they have proudly showed me 200 NFTs on their mobile phone. And they scroll through it and say, wow, look at this. That's what, interesting. And how do you live with it? But it's here. It's all a matter of viewpoint. We can change viewpoints. And we can deal with art differently. That's obvious.
You wanted to?
Yeah, I think I think NFTs comply to the psychology of a collector, collecting as much as possible. And I think this is an important point to NFTs.
Oh, yeah, actually, I wanted to say that too. So there's this whole culture. One thing that's interesting is that all the, you collect a work, but you do not put it in your cellar, but actually a work that gets more appreciation. So everybody is free to see it, right? The thing people say, oh, I could right-click it and I have the same image. No, but you own it, but everybody can see it, and an image gets, or an NFT gets more appreciation the more people know it, and of course the more appreciation it has, then we come into the economical thing, the higher its value it's also getting. So it's really almost like a challenge to, as a collector, to find those things that will gain appreciation also, yes, there's the bad side, the short-term speculation, but there's also a whole culture of people who now, you definitely profited a lot from this appreciation of generative art suddenly, and there are collectors who then try to know more about it and create websites around it and almost build kind of their own little whatever blah 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 wing only oligarchs could do in the physical spaces, but these people are the oligarchs of the NFT space and actually help to spread the knowledge and support artists. So there's a whole ecosystem. So it's there is, I mean, again, a lot of hopeful people. Ecosystem evolving where people are starting to do generative art because they saw somebody else do it, and then you never know what good comes out. So yeah, I hate a lot of aspects about it, but at the same time I also appreciate a lot of things, and so yeah, it's like with AI art. So you, of course, just get to, like, if you are not part of it, you get just to see the loud stuff. And that is often the ugly and disgusting stuff. But there is so much good things happening under the hood, and and some people make it even like deservedly kind of get successful.
It doesn't change the artistic practice. This is the thing. For me, because I didn't put a judgment, like a value judgment on the existence of this phenomenon, but my point was that I don't see how that affects the artistic process. It's more about how the art will communicate with the society, and it's more about like the cultural buzz around it. But if we talk about the embodiment of the art creation, it's something that has more about the disembodiment and has less to do with the process of creation itself. If this work was being done purely digital, or was done with a product that has nothing to do if it will be then sold as an NFT or not. That, I think, was my point.
Yeah, but what I can notice is, of course, that as any kind of system that's based on attention, it wears out. So that's also why then you see a lot of NFT projects going back into the physical. So there are combined things where people do paintings or sculptures or other things that came actually from the NFT, pure digital, because it's just more interesting, right? So yeah, maybe it's again to serve the market, but also just because they might have harvested that part and now they are looking for something else to do, and then it becomes embodied. I mean, funnily enough, so yeah, I'm wearing operator, and this is a couple who combine dance with NFTs, so right, and generative art. So there is definitely kind of a small but existing scene of people, serious artists who are able to bridge the physical and the digital and let's say, and NFTs are a means to do it because nobody else would appreciate or have the budget or the grants to make their ideas possible. But there are people who say, oh yeah, dance and NFTs, like that's something we haven't seen yet, so like show us. I buy this now so I can see it in a year when you finished it. So right, so and that's the beauty of it. It opens new doors because there are the existing doors that people can use, but there are a lot of people who come from the outside and who don't know about it or are not of the right pedigree, so don't fit into typical art boxes. So they have to go through this way. So I think we have a...
I have a question regarding I have a question. If there were some musical investigation, especially from the project from Peter, because I've been working in this music and body or dance relationship, and either this composition of time comes from the music part or dance part, the result is quite different. Because the musical composition is actually more abstract, especially in this Western tradition. This work, there's some formative abstraction of the time, and when it comes from body or material, like dance or movement, there is another formation from this visual thing. So I just wondered, since you have the musical background, so how did you investigate the relationship between robotic movement and the musical movement?
Well, I'm not really creating a relationship between musical research in robotics, really, but there is I would say a conceptual link somehow, because my research a long time ago, my background in computer music and human-machine interaction and machine learning originated from the fact that I wanted to have to set up some sort of conversational system between that would start from scratch. So a human and machine would be considered two agents that would communicate just by using sound, not by pushing buttons or anything else. So they would basically talk to one another in the cultural language of what we call music. So, but since this was based on non-idiomatic improvisation, I had to develop closer with the microphone. So I had to figure out how to do this because I didn't want to formalize this conversation. I wanted it would have to be like meeting a stranger in the street and saying, hello, how are you? And then this would bootstrap a conversation from nothing. I wanted it to have the same situation in a machine and in a human being. So the human would bring a lot of culture, like if you work with black jazz musicians, you know about where jazz comes from and the whole history, etc. And so a machine doesn't have a clue about all this. So, but as I said, the one orientation was that you had first to figure out how to listen. So you had to construct an artificial ear somehow, an ear that needs to be adaptive because a machine doesn't know what to listen for in the first place. And so I developed this architecture with three components basically: an artificial ear that was like a small neural network that would rewire itself. It had just 16 neurons. This was all implemented explicitly from scratch. And so it would rewire itself according to how functional, how well it could listen to this unpredictable human performer, and then develop sensors on the fly to wire to this thing. So it would again work according to this principle of maximization of diversity. It would want to listen to as many different things as possible and reconfiguring this like every so few seconds. And then the second component was a player agency inspired on the Society of Mind idea, Marvin Minsky, who I had a chance to discuss this with him in person. And the third component of my system was the motivation generator, because I reckoned that it would be impossible to have a system if it would not be motivated to, because I was the human performer, because I was the first to interact with my system. And so again, it needed to develop relationships. And as again, these two basic relationships, integration and expression. And also what was important is that the system needed to develop functionality to comply with a particular orientation. And it needed to do so also on the fly, so it needed machine learning to develop a policy and then evolve from exploration, because in the beginning you don't know what to say to this stranger. And then gradually you learn a bit and you develop some behavioral profiles. And then you know when I'm doing this, the other person is responding in some coherent way, there is some overlap. So we're tracking musical distance over time. And you're using a particular function. And when this function complies to the, is operational, functional to what your intention is, then it gets good points, it gets increased efficiency. So you're basically developing a pool of policies that gets evaluated and to evolve from exploration to exploitation. After like 15 to 20 minutes, you end up having some sort of style that was totally unexpected. It was kind of created from the emergent behavior. It's not designed. Nothing is designed in my system. It all emerges. So basically what you have is you have hundreds of processes that are very small and not intelligent by themselves, but you have many of them, and they interact locally through simple interaction, and from this simple interaction you get global emergent functionality, intelligence, you see? And then you end up seeing some patterns, and these patterns then are referred to as style. But of course it's important to note that it is the human interactor that projects style. There's no style as such in the machine. We project style, and the data itself is abstract. It doesn't say anything. It is people who map style onto abstract data that issues from the machine. So does that answer the background in my music research? No, the similar principles are being used in my robotic setup, and yeah, it all has to do with behavior and exploring behavioral scopes as I said, trying to develop a system that exhibits interesting behavioral patterns unpredictably, but still within a particular deterministic scope, like being virtually alive. So on the one hand, there are two ways basically to write software. Is on the one hand to say, well, I know what I want. I will write software to design a house or some structure, whatever, like an architect would do. And on the other hand, you could say, well, you can consider software more like gardening, where you're planting a seed and then you're creating the necessary conditions to grow this system and have it grow by itself without doing anything yourself. So you can only coexist with this otherwise symbiotic thing that you are trying to feed in a way. And so on the one hand you have instrumental control and automation, and on the other hand you have like emergent autonomy, which is totally different.
I just want to add something to this discussion. What you just described, the emergent patterns from the distributed computation that's going on, that could be compared to how we think consciousness arises from distributed processes in the brain, because these consciousness is thought of to arise from synchronization from the distributed cognitive processes. So we are back to the musical part of rhythmicization, whatever, and synchronization. So that's an analogy.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thought, because we consider all thinking happening in the brain, in like the spiking neurons model, etc. But still, there is what we call the inexplicable gap, which means that we have no idea about the relationship between the notion of consciousness and the gray matter over here. So we don't know how this thing bridges, which is fascinating, of course.
Sure, we need still where the magic happens.
Where the magic happens.
Probably it's the body. You need the body. Remove the body feelings and maybe it's impossible to bridge the gap.
Well, a human being certainly doesn't exist. Like if it would be like that, you would have like intelligence would be a being would have a head on a stick, and that would be what we call human beings. But of course, embodied cognition is spread out by you can only think because you have a body. Right?
I'm also thinking of the mystery of an anesthesia. So the body is there, but you're not aware anymore of your body.
When you're floating.
We're getting into the concept.
Can I have one more quick question? Sorry, I didn't like the motivation part. So, so my theory is like, what can it be? Its ultimate motivation is since it's an information processing thing, the only thing that keeps it alive is if somebody actually interacts with it, right? So is it trying to maximize that, or?
Well, we can only design machines by mapping the psychology of humans to the psychology of machines, right? And otherwise, a second thought would be like if we are looking for expressivity in machines and materials and objects, which is like in object-oriented ontology, in philosophy, where objects and materials are considered to exist beyond human perception. Which of course is a theory, it's a speculative theory. And, but I think it can be useful to think of the instrumental use of many different materials all at once, not necessarily computational media. And I think one of the, in particular now with embodied cognition, is the question of how all materials, not just computational materials, can merge into a new medium of artistic work. You see? Because we might limit the work to implementing algorithms and then maybe moving on to some device, a plotter, a robot, etc. But you know, art incorporates a lot more. Yes. I would say. Slime. Yeah. Or I always wonder, like, if you consider oil paint, it's been there for over 500 years now, but people are still love oil paint for some reason. It has to do with the chemistry somehow of this love for oil paint, right? Because we love to smell it and touch it because it's like, you know, it relates to somehow to sensations, and that is fascinating. It's only because it's fascinating because it's impossible to explain. Like I might say I love paint color, but it's impossible for me to communicate this feeling to you because you exist in a different way, although we are sharing the same universe. Yeah. See what I mean? All that is very fascinating.